Hello, Fairfax County Public Schools. This is Dr. Brabrand, Superintendent. I'm so glad to have you here for another weekly town hall as we count down return to school. It's wonderful to have you here this evening. We have a few special guests, as we are doing every week, to bring you the latest information on return to school. And we're really excited. We'll be taking some of your calls and some of your emails later in the program. I'm so excited as we're returning to school. In fact, our teachers have returned virtually this week to all of our Fairfax County Public Schools. They're busy engaging in a lot of professional development to get ready for the first day of school. But one of the things, even as we begin preparations for a strong virtual start, is they're receiving a lot of professional development and information about a topic that is of major concern to so many parents, to so many families, and to all of us in Fairfax County Public Schools. And that is the social, emotional, and mental health of every one of our students. I'm so excited to be able to have some special guests with me this evening who are going to talk about these important topics. First of all, we have Bethany Kozalak, who is going to talk to us about mental health and wellness. She's from Buffalo, New York, and she began her career as a school psychologist 14 years ago. She's been at Bucknell, she's been at Haley, she spent 8 years at West Potomac, and she actually just took a new job at Poe on the very first day of school closure for COVID in March. We're delighted, Bethany, to have you here. I know you have a passion for kids and engaging in relationships with them. Let's talk a little bit right off the top here. What is social emotional learning, and why is it so important here in Fairfax County Public Schools?
Thank you so much for having me today, and I'm really thrilled that I can speak to this today. So when I think of everything that's been going on since March, the word that comes to mind for me is resiliency. And resiliency is our ability to overcome adversity and bounce back from that and come through challenges even stronger. And so social emotional learning skills are those skills that allow us to become resilient and overcome challenges in our everyday lives. So we are developing new trainings. We have developed new trainings for our staff that are returning to school that focus on social emotional learning. And we're basing that off of the CASEL model. And CASEL is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And it really focuses on these 5 competencies that we are working with our schools to incorporate and embed into their instruction every day. SEL is not something that is new to schools, and all of our school environments have had SEL programs either embedded in the curriculum or separate programming, but we're trying to really make it stronger because we know that this has been a challenging time for our students. So we're really hoping that our staff will take the information that they're learning in these new modules and take that back to their CTs so they can embed it in the everyday instruction. I often think of English class being one of those times when we can really embed that into the core instruction. You read a book and you can have topics of conversation or about social awareness or relationship skills, problem solving that leads to responsible decision making. So how can our staff build that into the everyday instruction?
You know, Bethany, it's so fascinating to hear more about SEL and that it's not new here in Fairfax County Public Schools. It is one of the challenges, I think, across the country. CASEL invited me to participate with them at a congressional hearing just a year or 2 ago, and that a lot of our teacher preparation programs across the country have not yet fully embedded that CASEL programming around social emotional learning. And Fairfax County has been doing it for years. It's just so wonderful to hear that. What are some things that we're telling new teachers to help them know as they begin the year to really forge those social emotional learning connections so that they've got that CASEL framework? You say it's sort of embedded in a lot of the lessons that we're already doing, but are there things that we're doing to help particularly new teachers as they face children for the first time in this virtual environment?
That's a really good question. One of the main focuses as we return is really looking at relationship building. So we know that there are some barriers doing that through a virtual environment. And so the first module that they are going through is looking at how do we build those relationships? How are we taking time out of our day to make those stronger the best way we know how? And I know at the secondary level, they're also building that into the block schedule so that they're getting that extra time during advisory to focus on those things, building relationships within the classroom, but also between the staff and students.
You know, Bethany, I want you to know, and I want all of you to know, at the leadership conference just 2 or 3 weeks ago, and this week in my message to all teachers as they returned, I told them the first day of school is not about covering the syllabus, but it's about connecting with every child and beginning to form that kind of relationship that Bethany's talking about, so that we can have a positive, strong start to the school year. The connection is so important, and there is clear direction here in Fairfax County Public Schools about the need to form those strong relationships right up front. Bethany, one of the other key questions that has come up around this topic is, what's the difference between social, emotional, and mental health? Are they one and the same when we talk about social emotional supports and mental health supports? How are they alike, or how are they different?
That's a great question. So when we talk about social emotional learning, we're looking at skills that are taught to all students. So that is something, those are things we want for all of our graduates to have. It goes into our portrait of a graduate. And so these are skills that we are working with all students on. Then when we have students who are still struggling a little bit more, we see that they might need higher levels of intervention, and maybe it's due to a mental health challenge that they may be facing. And so for those, they're getting either small group interventions or individual interventions with clinicians, typically a social worker or psychologist. And whereas the Tier 1 social emotional learning is instructional staff, counselors, psychologists, and social workers.
Fantastic. And is mental health, I understand it's sort of on a continuum. Can you tell me a little bit about mental health and break that down a little bit more about the mental health and mental wellness as a continuum?
Yeah, and so I often compare the continuum of mental wellness to that of our physical health, right? Sometimes we may get sick, physically sick. And so with mental wellness, there are days that we are doing very well, we're connected, we're confident, we're feeling very resilient. But there are also days we might feel a little bit lonely or sad or upset. For students, it's very normal to be sad after a breakup or after the loss of a pet. And to experience those feelings is normal. We should expect those feelings to happen. What we want to be looking at is, when I start to get a little bit higher on that spectrum of mental health challenge, am I getting help that I need? How do I access that support? Am I using my self-help skills, my coping strategies, or am I asking somebody, a trusted adult preferably, for the help that I might need?
You know, Bethany, you mentioned days, and when you talk about a continuum, isn't it also true, or is it true, that some days you may be in a different place on the continuum than other days, and that we should expect, as we're preparing and having our students prepare for the school year to start virtually, those first days of school, and then as each month passes, that their place on the continuum may change based on the experiences that they're having?
Absolutely, and that would go forward now, especially during distance learning. I know a lot of us are having some uncertainty with how this is going to go with parents, staff, and students. But we would hope that we can be resilient, bounce back, use those coping strategies, access our supports, and be able to function in a way that is a little bit more mentally well. Same thing goes for those who are experiencing a mental health challenge. Just because you're experiencing that does not mean you're stuck in that place on the spectrum. There are ways to become more well over time.
And you know, Bethany, and I want Fairfax County Public Schools folks out there to know right now that when we had the spring COVID hit, it was so sudden. We only had a limited amount of time to do professional development. And it's so exciting, Bethany, to see that we're really infusing in the professional development as we prepare for this virtual start, that will focus on social emotional learning components, that will focus on mental health and mental wellness as a continuum, so that our teachers feel prepared, empowered, and they know where to go if they need to bring in additional help to provide those Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports? What are some of those supports look like in Fairfax County Public Schools?
Great question. So first of all, what's really important to know is that all of our Fairfax County Public Schools have at least one school counselor, school psychologist, and school social worker. And they are there to support families, to support students, and we are just a phone call away. The services that were available to them in person are still available to families now. And so that is a major thing we want people to know. Reach out if you have questions or if you need support.
Bethany, what if I think my child, as I'm watching as we start virtually, that my child may be a Tier 2 or a Tier 3 child needing some of those additional supports and interventions that you just talked about? What are the signs? And then what do I do if I'm seeing those signs?
Yeah. So when we're looking at signs and symptoms that something may be more than just having a few days where we're not feeling well, we're looking for how that's impacting daily functioning. And I like to look at it as, is it impacting our ability to live, laugh, and love? So when you see your child, are they struggling in school? Are they really struggling to stay engaged? Are their social relationships, even from a distance, being impacted? Are they withdrawing from activities that they've typically enjoyed? Are you seeing changes in sleeping or eating patterns? We know that teenagers might sleep a lot and might eat more or less than usual, but that could be typical development until it's really impacting that daily functioning.
You know, Bethany, one of the other things I've learned about you is you are an expert in first aid, but this is youth mental health first aid. Not only are you an expert in it, but you're training other teachers. Tell me a little bit about that, and is this something that others can learn more about? How can they learn more about it?
Great. Youth mental health first aid is absolutely one of my passions. Fairfax County has several social workers and psychologists who are youth mental health first aid trainers, and it sounds just like physical first aid. It's giving you an action plan on how to support someone if you're worried about their mental health. And so it is a training that has now become virtual, thank goodness. I'm glad that we have that opportunity, and staff can access that. They can contact me to have staff trained, but we also have something really neat. It's called Teen Mental Health First Aid, and this is the first year. We piloted it last year, but it's the same training adapted for our teenagers, and they can be trained because we know it is so important for students to look out for one another. We teach them to acknowledge the warning signs, to get help when they're worried about their friends, and that's what the Teen Mental Health First Aid training does.
I'm going to have to ask, because given that you've said that, I know the next question a caller may ask is, how could I get my child to get the experience to become a teenager or a teen mental health first aid helper?
That's going to be a good question as well. So the virtual training for that has not been fully developed, but will be by the fall, later in the fall. That comes from the National Council. And so once we have that virtual option, we are working with different schools to do those trainings with groups of students. Some of our first students that have been trained have been members of a club called Our Minds Matter, which is built around ending the stigma associated with mental health and creating a positive, mentally well climate for each school.
I predict this is going to be a popular additional online opportunity for our students to really take advantage of and feel like they can get empowered. Even in this time of the pandemic, they can learn resilience, they can learn new skills and feel empowered to help a friend, a peer. And so much of this powerful issue around mental health is really those connections between peers. That's why many of our students love school so much. Of course, they love learning new academic content, but the social emotional connection between peers and between teachers is so powerful. So we're really excited to learn more about that. Thank you, Bethany, for everything that you all are doing. Let's take a few calls and see what some of the questions are. First, we're going to do an email. In the past, my daughter took part in groups led by school counselors on various social emotional topics. They worked on peer relations, social skills, self-esteem, anger management, managing stress and anxiety. With all the issues that have been triggered by the pandemic, how do schools plan to assist children in dealing with all these emotions, let alone all the typical topics of child and adolescent development? Would either one of our guests want to share or answer that question? I know actually Claudia McDowell, you are here with us, and I know I haven't introduced you yet. You are one of our social work team extraordinaire employees, and you've been assigned at Lynbrook Elementary. You've been there since 2012. And prior to that, you worked in the Department of Family Services in Fairfax County. So you've supported teams around all kinds of things. Can you talk a little bit about some of the work that we can do to provide support for this? Or Bethany, either of you, as you would like.
You want to go ahead?
I'll start and then
I'll finish, yeah.
Wonderful. So as I said, one of the main things I would like to point out is that we do have those supports at every school with the social workers, psychologists, and counselors. And I know that they will be providing a lot of these supports to students and families throughout. I would encourage you, if this is something you're really looking for, to call the school and see how they will be providing those services. I know everybody's kind of building that a little bit differently, but those will be supports available at each school.
Great. Claudia, is there anything you wanted to add?
I would just add that, this is really what we do every day for students in our school, and knowing that these are unusual times and there are going to be some extra supports that we need. I know for the school team that I work at and my colleagues at their school teams with the school counselors and the psychology colleagues, we're planning for this, and we have a number of evidence-based programs that we can utilize to support kids. And despite the distance learning is not going to be a barrier to that, because we have been working to figure out how to reach to those kids who need those interventions and need those supports.
Great. Let's take a phone call. Caller, welcome to the Return to School Town Hall.
Hi. Yes. My question is regarding the return to school, and since it's going to be online, are counselors still going to be having office hours to help kids with any issues and needs they have regarding health, mental health, or academics?
Sure. Mm-hmm. Either of you? Which of you would you like?
I would say all you need to do is reach out to your school counselor, your school social worker, psychologist. Reach out and they will be able to point you in the right direction with the right individual to speak to, because they will be providing those supports.
Right. They are building that into their work week to we know how important it is for our students and for our families.
Let's take another phone call. Phone caller, welcome to the Town Hall. Yes, caller. All right.
To keep us parents informed. I have two specific questions. Number one is for the rising second grade kids. And in a normal time, they're going to have a COGAT test around November. What will be expected for this year given the special situation? And my second question is similar for middle school rising 8th grade students. They're supposed to have a TJ admission test around the same time. Is there any change or any decision made for this year's arrangement for those tests?
No, that's a great question, caller. We're still reviewing the fall COGAT test and the TJ admissions test, and we'll have additional information about that very soon. I do want to share with you about SAT test. We're continuing to offer the SAT test at 5 of our high schools in late August. We've actually even accompanied overflow in one of the schools at Chantilly and extended it to 2 additional high schools. And for our seniors this year in September, we are taking one of our instructional days and offering for free access to every senior to take the SAT test. In fact, there's already been a reach out by each high school to ask the family if your child wants to sign up to take that SAT for free. We really encourage you to do that. We know testing is one of the major issues. We actually are having some school psychologists already in a very limited fashion do some in-person testing that can't be done virtually. We've also done a little bit of testing around advanced math that we've had to do. And we are looking at some testing needs for our adult and community education classes, and even for the driver's ed behind the wheel test. So we really are having testing as a component that we are having some limited opportunities for in-person. And as far as COGAT and TJ, we'll have additional information on that later this school year. Let's take another phone call. Caller.
Hello? Hello?
Hi, welcome to the town hall.
Hi, thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
Yeah, my question is regarding my daughter. She goes to an elementary school, and I've seen a lot of increased anxiety, mood swings, and just really volatile behavior without getting the stimulation that she's used to getting at school in a familiar environment with familiar people. And my concern is that she can't access her learning or participate in virtual learning, and I know that's the only option that's been given so far. So I was wondering what other options or arrangements are being made for kids like her that have these significant special needs that can't access the virtual learning.
Bethany, you want to start?
So to start, I know that schools are working to develop different intervention blocks for students that need extra support. And in addition to that, there are a lot of supports being developed for families. I know that our Parent Resource Center has put out a lot of different ideas for behavior, and the behavior intervention teachers are supporting that process. Our ABA coaches are supporting that. And there will be future trainings being developed by social workers, counselors, and psychologists so that we can get tips on how to manage some of those challenging behaviors at home.
I also want you to know that we absolutely understand the importance of the social emotional connection. And one of the things I shared with the school board yesterday is as we begin to look at opportunities beyond the virtual start of the school year, as health conditions allow, to be able to provide cohort learning. Again, small targeted groups of cohorts, beginning with some of our most vulnerable students first, but some of those cohorts could be a social emotional cohort for kids that need that additional opportunity to make those connections in a way that can't be done in a virtual environment. We're going to do everything we can, first of all, to make those strong connections virtually, and then we are focused on figuring out appropriate ways as conditions allow to provide cohorts in schools to provide additional supports, whether it's on those Mondays during the intervention days or whether it's during our instructional Tuesday through Friday opportunities. Let's take a quick email. Will there be in-person or virtual extracurricular activities available to students? I know sports have been postponed, but what about other things like academic clubs, Model UN, tutoring, other volunteer opportunities? They're just as important, if not more so, to our kids and their emotional well-being. Well, first of all, we know how important it is not just for kids to succeed in the classroom and connect in the classroom, but also to make these additional extracurricular and co-curricular connections. We are working to provide online opportunities for those connections to happen this school year. We also are continuing, again, working very closely with the Virginia High School League. They have adopted option 3, which is postponing our sports until later in the fall, closer to December. At this time, we are still providing opportunities for conditioning of our athletes to take place, and we will continue to do so as health conditions allow and as the Virginia High School League provides the additional updates. And we expect to hear more from them actually in the weeks ahead. Let's take another email. What are you doing to support virtual learning for special education students, particularly younger ones? Is there any chance you can have small in-person classes for young special education students? My son is 5 and going into an enhanced autism kindergarten class. I don't know how he's going to be able to do virtual learning. I want you to know this is a very important question, and we directly addressed this yesterday in our return to school work session. Mike Bloom and our special services team has identified cohorts like this as some of the very first priority cohorts of kids to receive in-person instruction. We provided the metrics around health and staffing to the board and our operational metrics as well, other operational metrics as well yesterday. And we are going to work to provide additional information, including timelines, to the board at an upcoming work session. So stay tuned. We know that children with the characteristics that you describe need as much as possible the opportunity for in-person learning, and we are doing everything we can to create conditions for that to happen. We'll have more information soon. One more email: when schools reopen, how will parents be notified of positive COVID cases? Again, this is another topic that came up actually yesterday at our return to school work session. My recommendation to the school board for the review is that when we have a positive COVID case in a classroom, we would close that classroom for up to 14 days and work closely with the health department to do the contact tracing investigation to determine how long indeed that classroom would need to be closed. That is what our FCPS recommendation is, so that when we know we have a confirmed case, that we're making an immediate decision to close pending the outcome of the contact tracing investigation. The contact tracing investigation may find that there really hasn't been transmission within the school or the classroom, and may allow for a more quick return to in-person learning. But that is my recommendation, and the school board will be reviewing that as we prepare for in-person learning. Let's take a phone call. Caller, welcome to the Return to School Town Hall with a focus on social emotional learning. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you so much, Dr. Brabrand, and I really appreciate these weekly meetings. It's very helpful as an FCPS teacher. I just wanted to say again, I appreciate the focus on the SEL focus that we're doing, and I've been really excited this year to start using Google Meet, as a lot of my colleagues did that in the spring, and they were, have great things to say about it because you can see all of the students' faces at once. Unfortunately, this past week, we were told by our administration that there's no option to use that program, even though it's FCPS approved. When we use Blackboard Collaborate Ultra, you can only see 4 students' faces at once. And I think a mental health expert, anyone would agree that it's important for the students to see each other's faces for their social emotional health. They want to see each other. They want to interact with each other. So I'm confused about why our administration's telling us we can't use Google Meet, and if you have any guidance on that.
Well, thank you very much for that question. I would follow up with your school administration around that. We have offered 2 platforms back in the spring, and we are for this fall, our Blackboard Collaborate Ultra and Google Meets. We have been working very closely with Google and have applied to have the additional functionality of Google Enterprise, which will be happening later in September. So I really think it is a conversation to have at your school. Many of our teachers are more familiar and more comfortable using Blackboard Collaborate Ultra and have for many years. And I would really encourage you to have that conversation with your school administration about whether some additional flexibility for teachers can be had at the school. We have provided it at the division level, and we want teachers to feel comfortable using the platform that works best for them. Let's take another phone call. Caller, welcome to the Return to School Town Hall.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I am the father of a special needs son in high school. He lives with his mother in a single-parent home. And I know we were eagerly anticipating the hybrid plan before it was walked back because of quote-unquote health reasons. My question is, why is it safe now to bring children back for a paid caretaking program up to 6th grade, but it wasn't safe for children, especially secondary students who have special needs and really need that one-on-one interaction? It wasn't safe for them to come back to school even part-time.
No, thank you for that question, caller. I know that's a question that we're hearing in Fairfax County Public Schools, and I know it's a question going around the region and around the Commonwealth of Virginia. I want to say to this community quite clearly today, the decision that I recommended to the school board to go virtual, I believe, even 3 weeks later, was the right decision for Fairfax County Public Schools. Yesterday, what I shared with the school board to look at in-person learning is to begin to look at doing it through a cohort approach. Small groups of just a few kids who will not mix, who will not interact with other students, who will not be going through the hallways as we're seeing as other school districts and schools and universities are reopening and then days later are deciding to close. Day after day, in just the last few days, districts across this country are opening to the hybrid plan that we proposed and are already sending home hundreds of kids or are closing with additional COVID cases for students and staff. That is not the winning solution. I do recognize, though, that families like yours with kids of special needs are absolutely asking for the opportunity for some in-person opportunities. And that's why we've gone back and done work to move away for now from the hybrid learning, but instead focus on a cohort learning approach. The supporting return to school support for childcare is a cohort learning approach. Identifying special education kids, such as your kids, is a cohort learning approach. But I want to very clearly distinguish between a cohort learning of just a few kids who do not move between classes and the hybrid learning that we were proposing, which was to return kids to school normally, just on a reduced capacity, but allowing them to move throughout the building to access specials, to go to their elective classes, and to attend, especially in middle and high school, their full allotment of courses they had registered for back earlier in the spring. Cohort learning is a beginning. It is not the normal school day, but it is the approach that I am recommending that we take to provide some in-person opportunities for targeted kids like your children. And I really appreciate the question and want to continue to emphasize to the community that the hybrid learning that we proposed, as it is being rolled out across the country right now, is causing confusion, it's causing chaos, and it is causing more of those districts to shut down as quickly as they've opened. We've made the right decision here in Fairfax County, as has the entire Northern Virginia region and frankly the entire D.C., Maryland, and Northern Virginia region, in starting virtually and then methodically in a measured fashion begin to turn the dial up and allow for cohorted small groups of kids to come in person. And we'll be working and communicating with the community, not just yesterday, not just today in this town hall, but throughout the days and weeks ahead to keep you in the loop with our health conditions, our staffing conditions, and the operational level that we'll be functioning on here in Fairfax County Public Schools. Let's take another phone call. Caller, welcome to the Return to School Town Hall.
Hello, thank you very much for accepting this question, and thank you for everything you're organizing for us to be informed. As a parent, we really appreciate it. So my question is related to bell times, especially for the middle school. I'm really concerned after talking with my kids, who are also talking with other kids, and, there is like a big pressure for most of them, for starting school so early, being like 7:30. They lost their routine. It's going to be a challenge just to, overall to go to the virtual schooling. So having that early, I'm wondering if there is a possibility to reconsider that and seeing like if it's really like a best solution for our kids. So,
no, thank you for that question. That's a question we have received, and the school board asked me about last night as well. And let me tell you why my recommendation last night was then and remains now that we keep the bell schedules as they are for middle, high school, and for elementary. First of all, one of our objectives was to return to normalcy as much as possible, even as we start the school year virtually. These are the bell schedules pre-COVID. The the middle school day is also, with high school, involves some of our staff, our itinerant staff that move between schools, that require the schedule to be as it is between middle and high school. And it would stop many of our teachers from being able to provide the virtual classes that your children have registered for. The other thing that you have heard already tonight is everybody wants to know, gosh, how soon can we get back in during the school year for in-person instruction? If we start the middle school start time later, we're going to have to change yet again the schedules sometime during this year. And the reality is, for folks that would say, gosh, we love the later time, let's keep it. We had already presented a report to the school board back in the spring, just actually, believe it or not, as COVID was happening, that to change middle school start times to a later time would have an additional cost of millions of dollars. Right now, in this COVID pandemic, we are seeing a financial crisis that is impacting both our local and state and federal budgets. I'm not comfortable wanting to put out an opportunity for later start times that we can't do when we return back to in-person operations. And for all of those reasons, staffing, the cost, and already the staff and parents who've adjusted their schedules to the start time that was pre-COVID, I am recommending and continue to recommend that we keep our middle, high school, and elementary start times as they are. Thank you, caller. Let's talk a little bit with Claudia now. Claudia, we got to introduce you again a minute ago and your social work at Lynbrook. And thank you for everything you're doing. That's such a wonderful school. I got to visit last year with Principal Jay Nacco and got to see you. And one of the things that I know you've spent a lot of time working on in your expertise is around trauma, trauma-informed care, trauma-informed strategies. Tell me a little bit, because I think right now in our country, I think all of us, at, again, various levels, it's on a continuum based on personal experiences, but all of us have felt some level of trauma during this COVID-19 pandemic. Tell us a little bit about what trauma is and what are strategies that we can help provide trauma-informed care to our children at home, and how will FCPS be helping provide supports for families and students as well?
Well, thank you so much for asking me that, Dr. Brabrand. And I agree with you completely that we as a world are going through a shared collective traumatic experience, something that only, as I've seen in the news, only happens once in a generation. So there are a lot of unknowns. And so what we know is that when we are faced with a loss of control and an unknown, that increases our anxiety. It's actually even creates more anxiety than when we have a known that's bad. The unknown is what really causes high amounts of stress and dysregulation. And really for many years, FCPS has been creating programs and training to really address the needs of children who have gone through trauma. The wonderful thing about the interventions and supports for children who've had trauma is that it works for all children. It's good for all kids. And what we know works for kids who've had traumas and works for children who haven't had trauma is really creating safe and predictable environments. That's one of the things that schools are really wonderful about doing. We're doing that now in the distance learning model, but creating that community, that safe and supportive environment. The other thing that we know that really helps trauma is important relationships, vital relationships. Those are relationships that kids have with teachers, with significant people at school, school staff, with their parents, with peers, with people in the community. So as it relates to the school, the role of that classroom teacher, the role of other important people in the building, school social workers, counselors, psychologists, all of these things help with healing from trauma and creating a sense of safety for kids. And finally, the other thing that helps with support kids who have experienced trauma is opportunities to build self-regulation skills. And what I mean by that is learning how to manage feelings, labeling and identifying feelings, being able to breathe, take a time to sort of calm down the whole body system so that you can access different coping skills. Those are some of the things that we know help. And one of the things that is so wonderful that we're doing right now is we are doing lots of training for FCPS teachers and staff. We have a Building the Trauma-Informed Classroom. In fact, this summer, we've trained the most amount of staff that we ever have, and the demand it continues to grow. We're planning more training in the fall to really infuse those trauma-sensitive strategies into the classroom. The other piece that's important that we do sort of more facing parents and the community is through something called ACES Interfaith. And that's a collaboration between a number of organizations. There's several school psychologists and school social workers who are certified trainers, and we're providing trainings to families. I've done a couple in the community where we talk about childhood adversity and the science of resiliency and how we can support children and building self-healing communities. So these are some of the innovative things that we're doing here in Fairfax County to support children who've been through trauma. And again, within the context that to a certain extent, we've all sort of experienced some of that trauma in the last 5 months.
Claudia, you know, as a social worker, you're getting a chance to start that conversation multiple times a week with different families. How do you start it off at home? How do I leave now? How do I go to my child? I have 2 children at home who are rising seniors, and how do I leave right now and go home and say, are you experiencing trauma? How do you feel? How does a parent break the ice? What are some strategies? It sounds like you've got some good strategies that you talked about once the conversation gets going, but how do you break the ice to let the kids feel comfortable enough to start sharing so that you can apply some of these wonderful ideas that you've shared?
Absolutely, I can talk about that. And I'm, in addition to being an FCPS employee, I wear a hat too as a parent. I have 2 kids in high school and 1 in elementary. So these are conversations that I'm having at home with my children as well. There are a number of things that parents can do. So I would say assume that what kids are going through right now is stressful. Okay, whether you want to label it or trauma or not, definitely approach it from the supports that they need to build self-regulation and coping. There are many things that parents can do to help support kids in this time. Some of them are things that I know parents are already doing, but just to emphasize, building routines for your children, especially as they go back into school. Sometimes over the summer, things are a little different, but as we prepare to go back to school, thinking about what are those routines in the day that will set them up to feel that their learning environment is predictable. Because what we know is when children have predictability, their stress levels go down. Limiting media exposure. You know, this is a really important thing for kids and for adults too. I know that at the beginning of the pandemic, I was a news junkie, and when we were all sent home, and I was watching it a lot, and I had to take a step back and think this isn't really good for my overall health. Bethany talked about wellness, and so making sure that we're not exposing our children to too much news and talking about it with them in a way that's developmentally appropriate. We know that movement and exercise is really good for the body and helps with reducing stress levels for children and helping to de-stress and reduce some of that traumatic symptoms that might come up for kids. Reaching out to neighbors, whether it's leaving a note on children's doors or just doing something kind for somebody else. The other thing I really want to emphasize as you have these conversations with your children is we talk a lot about social distancing and physical distancing, and these are absolutely important things for us to do as it relates to mitigation. But we really still need emotional closeness. So drawing your child in and talking to them, maybe open-ended questions about how are you feeling about what's going on, and what do you, what's different in your life, and building that back and forth communication with them is one of the things that can be the most important because we want to keep that emotional closeness with our kids.
Claudia, one of the things, you talked about connections and conversations. How do we do that with our English language learners? How are we bridging the communication gaps and really letting our families know across all these different languages and cultures how important this is? What are some of the things that you're doing as a social worker to get the word out so that families know about all these great strategies and these great opportunities to really have these kind of conversations with their children?
Well, we have a very culturally and linguistically diverse community. That's one of the things that I love about the school that I work in. I am a Latina and I speak Spanish, so I've definitely been able to use that in my work with families. We have a diverse workforce. I know at Lynbrook we look for all opportunities to engage families in a culturally and linguistically sensitive way. So getting the materials out in Spanish, making sure that anything that we send out is going to be available to them in those home languages. Many of the presentations that I've done around trauma have actually been in Spanish for some of our predominantly Spanish-speaking communities. So there is a real emphasis on outreach to all members of our community.
That's fantastic. I know we're doing a lot. We're sending out tech tips to parents in multiple languages already to get them ready for the virtual learning start. We're looking at modules of training for parents to learn more about mental health, instructional practices, and we've really got to continue to work and want to hear from our community what are the additional supports and resources they need to feel like they can have their children be successful this school year, and just to face the societal moment that we all have. As you said, we're all together experiencing this pandemic together, and we want to be there for our community and to all of our colleagues and neighbors and friends, and especially, of course, our students. So thank you, Claudia, for sharing everything that you guys are doing. Let's take an email. Why are schools taking attendance during virtual learning? I have daycare issues and would like to teach my children at night. Well, one of the things I want you to know is we're going to be very, very flexible. We're working with the Commonwealth of Virginia, and we're going to be very flexible about how we handle attendance. Attendance is not going to be whether you've just shown up the minute that the class starts. We're going to be recording the classes. So attendance can be interpreted beyond just whether they were there for the session in the face-to-face, but if the student is able to access that class at a later time. So we really are about to share out a much more flexible approach to attendance this year, because we know that that flexibility is so key to families, and we'll be sharing those updates with you very soon. Yes, we're going to take a phone call now for our Return to School Town Hall. Caller, welcome.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, good evening. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. On an earlier virtual town hall, an email was sent asking about the availability of textbooks. And the gentleman that was on the panel that responded to the question essentially said that textbooks would be distributed as they are available, but then said that digital or online textbooks are available. That is the go-to. But that didn't really speak to decreasing the amount of screen time that kids are going to be dealing with in this first quarter. So I wanted to sort of re-ask the question to see if there are going to be updated textbooks available for all of the subjects that require them, so that kids who are overwhelmed by the excessive amount of screen time they're going to have can still learn in a way that works best for them.
Sure. And thanks. I talk a lot about every child by name and by need. We have done a lot more to create virtual or digital textbooks across elementary, middle, and high school levels. We've also purchased at the elementary level additional software for both reading and math that's very interactive, very engaging, that I think parents are really going to like a lot. And for our special education parents, some of our companies before that weren't allowing us to have virtual applications of their work or their textbooks are going to be providing it. But specifically around this need, if your child and you're finding that your child needs that textbook or is struggling to have a connection on the computer, or you're feeling that it's just too much screen time, I really encourage you to reach out to the teacher, to call the school, and we can figure out ways to provide the materials that you need so that your child can be successful. Let's take another phone call. Caller, welcome to the Return to School Town Hall.
Hi, Dr. Brabrand. Thanks so much for taking my call.
You're welcome.
And thank you for the program and for having an ASL translator. Really do appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I have heard that the social emotional curriculum is going to be second step. If you could please confirm whether or not that's accurate. And then secondary, that curriculum is designed for pre-K through 8th grade. So what curriculum will be used for high school students?
I'm going to start, and then I'll see if Bethany wants to answer. Or wants to add to my answer. We have a host of different approaches to provide for social emotional learning. Second Step is a program that we've had and have in Fairfax County Public Schools. Many of our schools have used the Positivity Project as a way to forge those strong social emotional connections. And we are really offering the Castle framework to all of our schools and giving it to all of our teachers, and we're embedding that framework into a lot of our instructional pacing guides so that you're actually doing social emotional learning and supports through the instructional program. As far as any additional things, I'll see Bethany, is there anything else you would want to elaborate on in that question?
I mean, just to add to that, some schools do have second step curriculums and choose to use that, but that is not something that every school needs to use or is required to use. It's as you said, different schools are using different tools, and we really encourage each building to use what is best for their school community. That being said, we've also developed a tool for schools to be able to look at different curriculums and options available for their students and their school community. So that will be available soon.
Thank you so much. Let's take another phone call. Caller, welcome to the Return to School Town Hall.
Hi, yes, thank you so much for taking my call today. And I know you talked a little bit about the attendance policy being a lot more freer and open. But I did have a question, especially for our younger students, kindergarten and first graders, who are just at the beginning of their learning experiences. And I definitely want to prevent them from getting stressed out or building any sort of negative experience or perspective towards the learning experience, especially looking at some of these tentative schedules and looking that they're going to be pretty much all day online courses. So is there any way that can you explain a little bit more what that attendance policy for those younger students will be, or dig a little deeper into what those recorded online classes will look like, so that maybe if curriculum can be supported by family and friends, we can do it at a more flexible pace?
Sure. Well, we've shared with our principals to have teachers record all of their large group instructional times in classes. Now, very small group, individual instruction will not be recorded. I do want to be clear about that. But we need to give flexibility in this moment in virtual learning, that if your child needs to step away for 5 minutes, 15 minutes, even more time, then you need to, as a parent, you know your child best, and to allow that flexibility to happen. We've got to provide that kind of grace to each other and for ourselves. Again, we're going to record those lessons, so a lot of the material will be able to be reviewed. But we've got to have a more flexible approach this year. One of the things, and to be honest, again, it's trying to find the right balance. Part of the feedback of the spring was that there was not enough instructional time face-to-face. It was also true when the state closed that there was not to be new instruction, nor was the instruction to be graded. The governor did make it clear in June, as we were reopening schools, that this year would be new instruction and it would be graded instruction. So we do want additional flexibility, but we are going to cover new content. We are going to return to our traditional grading policies, and we do want to do everything we can to keep our students engaged. But we also have to, and I'm confident our teachers will work. And one of the things we're doing in professional development right now, just because the time is with the teacher doesn't mean it's all got to be screen time. Many times they'll be broken into groups. Many times they'll be asked to stop off the screen and do some individual work and then return in 5 or 10 minutes. Frankly, that's what we're doing as adults right now in Fairfax County. I sit in a lot of meetings where there's a pause, come back in 10 minutes after you read this material, be prepared to ask questions. And some of that kind of work is going to be part of how we do instruction. One of the things that's kind of interesting that we don't realize, or at least maybe sometimes it's just that moment of, even in traditional school, the teacher is not talking the whole 6.5 hours. Your child was doing before directed independent work, self-directed independent work, working with an individual child or in a small group, and we're going to do as much as we can to replicate that same instructional environment in this virtual start. Let's take another phone call. Caller, welcome to the Return to School Town Hall.
Hi, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I was rather disappointed to hear that the start times for the various schools will remain as planned. My reasoning for that, I was hoping for a later middle school start time, which would hopefully make lunchtime a little bit later for the middle schoolers. Right now, I think the plan is to have middle school lunch be something like 10:30 to 11:30, and elementary school lunch be 11:30 to 12:30. I was hoping it was going to their lunches would overlap to some degree because in some parents' homes where the parents are working, they may not even be able to stop long enough to have lunch with the kids. Therefore, the kids would be sitting eating lunch by themselves unless they had siblings whose lunch coincided, or if the older sibling needed to help the younger siblings with lunch, that would be a possibility. But with two completely different lunch times and no overlap at all, there isn't much ability to have family lunches, conversations, problem solving, stress relief, and support in that aspect. Can you speak to that as a possibility to overlap lunch times in any way, shape, or form?
Well, let me tell you this. I really appreciate that, you calling in. We understand the challenges that you are facing, that so many families are facing on this. And again, I tried as best as I could to share the rationale around the start times with the staffing challenges that we had, with the change as we're trying to move to in-person. But I do have a recommendation for you, particularly if you have both an elementary and secondary and you're trying to deal with those lunch times. That's the opportunity to work, particularly at the elementary school, and look at what special is being offered after that first block of time. The first 2 or 3 hours are going to be core instruction. Then we're looking at a special. To be able to work and be flexible with that elementary school, perhaps letting your child come back from lunch a little later so that there's an overlap time for your middle school and elementary child. But we know there are real challenges. I'd encourage you to work with the school and work with your teacher. They know this is not going to be a school year that's business as usual. We're going to have to extend more grace. We're going to have to be more flexible. And we are committed to working with you to figure out how to make it work for every family as much as possible with the focus on every child by name and by need. Let's take another email. How do I enforce structure in my child's life during the school day without overstepping those boundaries? I don't want to yell, but it often comes down to that. Which of you would love to take that one? Claudia, you want to start, and then Bethany?
You want to add on, Bethany?
Perfect.
That is such a wonderful question, and I know that's a common stress that parents feel around building that structure and not wanting to get into power struggles with your child every day. Part of what I would recommend is, I talked a little bit about building those routines. If appropriate and your child is able to participate in that conversation, talk about what that routine may look like ahead of time, right? Maybe they have the opportunity to help with some of the planning and can come up with some strategies that might help them with that transition. So is it, in the morning sort of a soft start where they're doing some coloring activities and then phasing into sitting in front of the computer? Are there certain routines that you can put into place? I also think, and Dr. Brabrand alluded to this in his previous comments, this is where flexibility and that grace with each other and really close collaboration with your child's teacher, because they may have some strategies that they use to engage children in the distance learning. If they need extra brain breaks, as they call them in elementary school, we know that those are really good for kids and help them in that moment de-stress and come back to academic engagement. So this is a partnership that we really want to have with our parents, and there's a whole team at the school, whether it's the teacher, the social worker, the counselor, the psychologist, that we can come up with something individual for your child, as well as having your child participate in that planning.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of what Claudia said, I think it's really powerful to have those pre-planning meetings, right? We have a few weeks before school starts, working together with your child when you're both in a state of calm, and being able to say, hey, what do you think we should do then if you're not following through with what we have set up right now? But also reviewing the schedule for the day with each other. So I know if a working parent has a meeting and the kids are in learning sessions, looking at each other's schedules together before you start out that day, so listen, I have a really important meeting at this time, and I know you have class at this time. Can we work together to make this work? Because this is a challenge.
One thing, I just want to thank the person who wrote that email and shared the vulnerability to share that sometimes you're yelling at your child. That's not the outcome that I know you want as a parent, nor that any of us want. But the vulnerability to share what you've just shared is also the vulnerability to say, as Bethany said, that work with your child as a team. You need structure. Your child needs structure. You have challenges right now in the pandemic. So does your child. How do we work together and say, hey, we got this? And what I want you to know tonight is when you feel you're pushed beyond the brink, when you even feel that you're seeing your child struggle, people right here in Fairfax County Public Schools, in every single school, are equipped with the skills to give you the help and support you need so your child's going to be successful. I want to thank you again, Bethany. I want to thank you so much, Claudia. You all have done a terrific job. And we are committed here in Fairfax County Public Schools to have professionals like you. We're lucky to have professionals like you, and we're committed to making sure this year you all are front and center as we work with students and families to have a strong virtual start that is undergirded with strong social emotional learning supports and mental wellness supports. And I am grateful for all that you and your colleagues are doing. We hope you come back next week for Town Hall. We'll share that topic with you very soon, and we'll continue to communicate with you as we move through preparing for a strong virtual opening on September 8th and additional information as we begin our school year this fall. Thank you again for tuning in. Stay safe, and we will see you soon.